The Atlantic Ocean in the dead of winter is, it's not just a body of water. I mean, it is an active, hostile entity.
Oh, absolutely. It's unforgiving.
Right. And I really want you, the listener, to picture the sheer isolation of being out there in, late January of 1921. You are hundreds of miles from anything resembling safety.
Yeah, and the temperature's hovering right near freezing.
Exactly. The spray coming over the bow is literally turning to ice on the rigging. And beneath you is just this pitch black, indifferent abyss.
It's terrifying just to think about.
It really is. And crucially, you are totally severed from the rest of the world. I mean, there's no GPS pinging your coordinates to a server somewhere.
Right. No satellite phones, no internet.
Nothing. Even the wireless radio sets back then were notoriously finicky. They were frequently dead or just completely absent on merchant vessels.
Yeah, they were a luxury, really, not a guarantee.
So if the hull breaches or, the rigging snaps or, God forbid, the men you are trapped with turn on you, you are entirely on your own.
It's an environment of absolute terrifying vulnerability. I mean, the ocean just strips away every illusion of control that we build up on land,
Yeah, completely.
You are entirely at the mercy of the weather, the mechanical integrity of your ship, and honestly, the psychological stability of the people confined in that wooden space with you.
The psychological stability, that's the scariest part.
Right, because when you leave port in 1921, you effectively step off the edge of the earth until you arrive at your destination.
You really do. And that is the stage for our deep dive today. Dawn is breaking on January 31st, 1921.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So the location is the jagged, violent edge of Diamond Shoals, right off Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. And the oceanography here is notoriously lethal.
Yeah, it's where the warm Gulf Stream just slams directly into the freezing Labrador Current.
Exactly. That collision creates these legendary storms and constantly shifting invisible sandbars. I mean, it is widely known as the graveyard of the Atlantic.
A very earned title, by the way.
Very earned. And sitting right there, driven hard into the churning surf, is a massive, magnificent, five-masted commercial schooner called the Carroll A. Deering.
And, the visual the Coast Guard surfmen are confronted with that morning is, well, it's pure nightmare logic.
Oh, so?
Because the vessel isn't just grounded. Every single one of her massive sails is fully set.
Oh, wow. Wait, really?
Yes. They are billowing, snapping violently in the gale force winds, acting like giant kites trying to drag this colossal wooden hull deeper into the sand.
That is such a haunting image.
Right. A ship of that sheer scale, with its sails completely deployed, should be slicing through the open water. But instead, it's a captive beast.
And it gets worse, right?
Yeah, it does. As the shore crews study the deck through their brass spyglasses, the dread really sets in. The ship is completely unnervingly devoid of human life.
It's just a ghost ship. So you are about to embark on a deep dive into one of the most chilling, unsolved maritime mysteries in American history.
We've pulled the historical logs, the Coast Guard after-action reports, telegrams, and thousands of pages from the federal investigations.
We are going to reconstruct the anatomy of a nightmare. Because the Carroll A. Deering isn't just a shipwreck. It is a real-life horror story.
It's a story of paranoia, claustrophobic isolation, and a crew that vanished into the freezing sea.
Leaving behind a perfectly intact ship. I mean, they left a trail of baffling, contradictory evidence. We're talking shattered steering columns, forged communications, and mutinous death threats.
Yes, screamed in tropical ports, not to mention a government inquiry that basically found itself chasing ghosts.
So to understand the sheer scale of the tragedy, we really had to start with the physical reality of the vessel itself.
Right. The Carroll A. Deering was not some decrepit, aging cargo boat pushed past its lifespan.
No, she was state-of-the-art, wasn't she?
Exactly. She was launched just over a year earlier in 1919 by the G.G. Deering Company out of Bath, Maine.
And Bath was like one of the legendary shipbuilding capitals of the world.
It was. And this ship was a masterclass in wooden marine architecture. She measured 255 feet long and weighed in at 1,879 tons.
That is massive.
Huge. To put that in perspective, manipulating the rigging on a five-masted schooner requires a highly coordinated, physically punishing choreography from the crew.
And there's a really fascinating historical tension built into her very existence, too. Because by 1919, steam-powered steel ships had effectively won the war for the ocean.
Oh, yeah. Steam was the future.
Right. They didn't rely on the wind. They ran on schedules. So the Deering was one of the last great commercial sailing vessels ever built.
She was kind of a dinosaur of the wind.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Built to haul massive, dirty bulk cargo like coal that didn't require the speed of a steamship.
And G.G. Deering even named the ship after his own son, Carroll A. Deering. So there was immense pride and immense capital tied up in those oak frames.
Which brings us to her fateful voyage. On July 19, 1920, the Deering departs Puerto Rico, heading up to Newport News, Virginia.
Right, to load a massive cargo of coal destined for Rio de Janeiro.
And at this initial stage, the ship is under the command of the absolute best leadership available, right? Captain William H. Merritt.
Yes. Merritt wasn't just a seasoned mariner. He was a documented, highly decorated hero of the First World War.
His service record is incredible. I mean, just 2 years prior, in 1918, Merritt was commanding another Deering schooner when they were intercepted off the coast of New Jersey by a German submarine.
The U-117.
Yeah. And under fire, with his ship being actively shelled and sunk by the Germans, Captain Merritt maintained absolute discipline.
He managed to coordinate the evacuation and literally saved his entire crew.
So the men signing onto the Deering in 1920, which was a crew of 10 Scandinavian sailors, mostly Danish, they knew they were sailing under a captain who had looked death in the face and won.
He was a proven entity. You could trust him.
Plus, he brought his own son, Sewell Merritt, along as his first mate.
And that father-son dynamic at the top of the command structure, it creates an incredibly stable, unified front.
Yeah, it's like a family business at that point.
Exactly. The crew respects the captain's wartime valor, and the first mate is just an extension of that trusted bloodline. It's a tight, highly competent unit.
But then, on August 26, after loading the coal and clearing the Virginia Capes for the open ocean, the voyage suffers its first major psychological blow.
Captain Merritt falls suddenly, severely ill.
And it has to be serious, right? Because a man who stared down a U-boat artillery barrage doesn't just ask to turn back for a minor fever.
Right, absolutely not. So the Deering is forced to alter course and put into the port of Lewis, Delaware, solely to drop off the ailing captain.
And naturally, Sewell Merritt, the first mate, disembarks to take care of his father.
Yeah, he's a good son. But just like that, the entire leadership core of the ship is gone.
The Deering Company is immediately thrown into crisis management mode.
Oh, they panic. They have a massive asset fully loaded with coal, and, in the shipping industry, delays just eat profit margins alive.
So they need a captain and a first mate immediately.
They scramble. They end up recruiting Captain Willis B. Wormel, a 66-year-old veteran mariner.
But the crucial detail here is that they had to pull him out of retirement to do it.
Right. And to fill the role of first mate, they hire a man named Charles B. McClellan.
I look at this command shift, and it's kind of like pulling the keystone out of a massive stone archway.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, because the pressure of the ocean, the grueling physical labor of the sails, the sheer danger of the environment, that's gravity constantly pushing down on a crew.
And without Captain Merritt's proven authority holding the center, the crew's discipline is suddenly under immense structural strain.
I mean, you're replacing a revered war hero with an aging retiree and substituting a trusted son with a complete unknown.
It's just like being locked in an escape room, right? Imagine your highly competent team leader suddenly leaves, replaced by two strangers who immediately throw off the group's equilibrium.
Exactly. How dangerous is a sudden shift in the chain of command like that when you're about to cross the open ocean?
It's incredibly dangerous. A ship in 1920 operates on a very rigid, uncompromising caste system. The captain's word is absolute law, and the first mate is his enforcer.
Right.
So these 10 Danish sailors suddenly find themselves isolated under a new regime that hasn't earned their trust at all. And in the claustrophobic confines of a wooden hull, trust is literally a survival mechanism.
Because when a sudden squall hits at 2 in the morning, you don't have the luxury of second-guessing an order.
No, you have to believe the man screaming from the quarterdeck knows how to keep you alive. When that trust is a vacuum, it is almost immediately filled by resentment and paranoia.
And that paranoia is a slow poison. Physically, the run down to South America goes fine,
Yeah.
They leave the East Coast on September 8, 1920, and they make it to Rio de Janeiro.
They unload the coal, the company makes its money.
On paper, it's a success. But the true storm is brewing internally. Because while they are docked in Rio, we get these highly documented, incredibly dark glimpses into Captain Wormel's psychological state.
Yeah, he seeks out the company of an old friend, a Captain Goodwin, who was commanding another vessel in the same port.
And Wormel sits down with Goodwin and just completely unburdens himself.
He does. He explicitly details his visceral disdain for his own crew. He feels alienated, surrounded by hostility.
And he specifically states that out of the entire manifest, the only man he actually trusts is the ship's engineer, Herbert Bates.
Just pause and imagine the absolute dread of that reality.
I can't even fathom it.
You are the master of a 255-foot ship. You are responsible for the lives of everyone aboard, and you actively despise them.
You don't trust the men working the rigging. You don't trust the men taking the helm. You don't even trust your own first mate.
The only guy you have any faith in is the one managing the mechanical pumps. And you can't escape them. There is no commuting home at the end of the day.
Right. You're trapped in a floating wooden box with a dozen men you believe are your enemies.
It creates this awful feedback loop of toxicity. If the captain views the crew with contempt, the crew absolutely feels it.
And the focal point of all this animosity centers directly on the relationship between Captain Warmel and First Mate McClellan.
Right. And this simmering hatred finally boils over into the public eye on the return journey.
So, the Deering departs Rio on December 6, 1920, empty of coal and heading back toward the United States. And they make a standard logistical stop at the island of Barbados to take on provisions.
And Barbados is where the powder keg finally catches a spark.
Yeah, First Mate McClellan goes ashore, hits the town, and gets blindingly drunk.
Classic mistake.
He ends up at a place called the Continental Cafe, and he completely unravels. He corners Captain Hugh Norton of the ship Snow, who happened to be drinking there.
And McClellan just unloads this bitter, furious tirade against Warmel.
He complains bitterly that the captain constantly undermines his authority and interferes when he tries to discipline the crew.
But McClellan also reveals a massive operational vulnerability.
What does he say?
He loudly complains that he, the first mate, is being forced to shoulder all the actual navigation of the vessel because Captain Warmel's eyesight is too poor to do it himself.
Wow. And we really have to talk about what navigation actually means in 1920. It's not glancing at a radar screen or a digital chart plotter.
Oh, not at all. It is an exhausting, highly technical, mathematical daily ritual.
Yeah, to find your position in the open ocean, you are using a marine sextant to shoot the angle of the sun at local noon.
Right, or specific celestial bodies during twilight. And then you are cross-referencing those angles against a highly sensitive marine chronometer set to Greenwich Mean Time.
And you are pulling out dense sight reduction tables and performing manual spherical trigonometry on the rocking deck of a ship just to plot a single line of position.
Exactly. So if Warmel's eyesight is failing, he literally cannot read the microscopic scale on the sextant. He cannot see the horizon sharply enough to bring the sun down to it.
So McClellan is doing all the mathematical heavy lifting to keep the Deering from smashing into a reef.
He's carrying the ultimate responsibility of the ship's survival.
But he's doing it while being treated like an incompetent subordinate by a captain who fundamentally resents him. I mean, that is a recipe for pure, unadulterated hatred.
And at the Continental Cafe, that hatred crosses the line from complaints into a literal, unambiguous death threat.
Wait, he literally says he'll kill him.
Yes. Sitting in that cafe, Captain Norton, his own first mate, and another mariner all overhear McClellan make a chilling, distinct promise.
What were his exact words?
Fueled by alcohol and rage, he states, "I'll get the captain before we get to Norfolk, I will."
Wow. It doesn't get much clearer than that. That is an open declaration of mutiny and murder spoken in public by the second in command of a major American merchant vessel.
And initially, the system works. The local authorities in Barbados get wind of his drunk, threatening behavior, and McClellan is arrested.
He is thrown into a jail cell. The threat is neutralized. The captain is safe.
But then Warmel makes a decision that is just staggering in its hubris.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
What does he do?
On January 9th, 1921, Captain Warmel goes to the jail, bails McClellan out, forgives him, puts him back on the ship in his role as first mate, and sets sail for Hampton Roads.
Are you kidding me? I mean, why would a seasoned captain bail out a man who publicly threatened his life?
It defies all logical self-preservation.
Right.
You have a 66-year-old captain who already admitted he trusts no one but the engineer.
Right.
And he has his hostile, insubordinate first mate safely locked in a colonial prison. To invite that man back into your sanctuary is an almost incomprehensible underestimation of human malice.
I really try to get into Warmel's head here. I mean, was it sheer arrogance? Did he think, I'm the master of this vessel, he's just a loudmouth drunk, I can crush him if I need to?
Or maybe it was the crushing economic pressure of the Deering Company. You know, every day they sit in Barbados waiting to hire a qualified navigator is money burned.
Yeah, maybe he just wanted to get the voyage over with, but whatever his rationale, they leave the safety of the port.
And now the Deering is essentially a floating powder keg.
The Deering sails out into the open ocean, totally isolated, carrying a first mate who has promised to kill the captain. And what happens next happens entirely in the dark.
We jump forward nearly 3 weeks. It is now January 28th, 1921.
Okay, so they're back up the U.S. coast.
Right. The Deering has traveled up the coast and is spotted by the Cape Lookout lightship off North Carolina.
And a lightship is basically a manned, anchored vessel acting as a warning beacon for treacherous shoals, right?
Exactly. And the master of the Cape Lookout lightship is Captain Jacobson.
And the interaction Jacobson has with the passing Deering is where the mystery officially turns horrifying.
So the Deering sails close enough to hail the lightship. But the man who steps up to the rail with the megaphone isn't Captain Wormel.
And it's not First Mate McClellan either.
No. Jacobson reports that the man shouting over the waves is a tall, thin man with reddish hair and a heavy foreign accent.
Wait, there's no red-haired officer, right?
None. If we look at the crew manifest, there are no officers matching that physical or linguistic description. The officers were American.
Right, and the deckhands were Scandinavian.
So this tall, red-haired man with the accent was almost certainly one of the Danish common sailors, yet he is the one holding the megaphone. He is acting as the official voice of the ship.
And he shouts a message, right? He claims the Deering had lost its anchors in a severe gale down off Cape Fear.
Yeah, and he asks Captain Jacobson to please notify the owners, the G.G. Deering Company, of their situation.
But Jacobson isn't just listening. He's watching the ship through his glass. And he notes something far more terrifying than just missing anchors.
He observes the crew of the Deering casually milling around on the quarterdeck.
That detail is the smoking gun of a collapsed hierarchy.
It absolutely is.
I mean, Jacobson notes they were milling around the quarterdeck. In 1921, that's sacred ground. That's strictly officer territory.
Precisely. The quarterdeck is the raised deck behind the mainmast. It is the nerve center of the ship, the location of the helm, and it is fiercely guarded as the officer's sanctuary.
For the common crew to be casually standing there, the chain of command hasn't just slipped, it's completely broken.
On a merchant sailing vessel, an ordinary seaman steps onto the quarterdeck for exactly 2 reasons. To take his assigned trick at the wheel, or because an officer explicitly ordered him there to perform a task.
You do not loiter.
You do not socialize. You certainly don't mill around. The strict caste system of maritime law demands absolute physical separation.
So for Jacobson to see the Scandinavian crew members casually occupying the officer's domain tells him everything he needs to know.
The officers are no longer in control. They are either incapacitated, imprisoned below decks, or dead.
Jacobson realizes he is watching a disaster in real time. So he rushes down to his radio room to transmit an urgent warning to the Coast Guard to get an interception vessel out there immediately.
And here we hit the brutal tragedy of early 20th century technology.
Jacobson's wireless radio is dead.
It is completely inoperable. He is entirely helpless.
Oh, that is so frustrating.
He possesses the critical intelligence of an ongoing mutiny or disaster, but he has no voice. He is forced to stand on the deck of his lightship and simply watch the Deering sail past.
Disappearing into the Atlantic fog, a doomed ghost ship that no one can warn and no one can stop. It is sickening.
And the very next day, January 29th, the Deering is sighted one final time.
Another vessel transiting the area spots the massive 5-masted schooner. But her course has altered. She is now sailing directly, unmistakably, toward the deadly expanse of Diamond Shoals.
And this observing vessel notices something even more chilling than the crew on the quarterdeck. When they look at the Deering, they see nothing.
The decks are empty.
Completely, totally barren, and not a single human soul is visible above deck.
But the observing ship assumes, hey, it's broad daylight. The Cape Hatteras lighthouse is clearly visible on the horizon. The Diamond Shoals lightship is right ahead. Surely there is a man at the wheel who is about to adjust course.
They don't hail her. They sail on.
And the Deering sails silently, completely empty, right toward her own execution.
It is the absolute final moment the ship is seen in navigable, deep water.
The creeping dread of this moment is just overwhelming to me, because the momentum of the tragedy is already locked in.
It's like watching a driverless car careening toward a cliff at night.
Yes. There's a creeping, sickening dread in knowing that something catastrophic has already happened behind closed doors, and you are helplessly watching the aftermath play out.
The violence, the betrayal, the breaking of the captain, all of it has already happened. The ship hitting the shoals is just the physical punctuation mark on a human atrocity that occurred out of sight.
And when she finally hits the sandbars, the sheer kinetic force of a nearly 2,000-ton ship driving into solid ground at sailing speed is catastrophic.
She grinds to a violent halt, trapped. But whatever secrets are held inside that wooden hull are guarded by the absolute fury of the Atlantic.
Which brings us to the morning of January 31st. Dawn breaks over the graveyard of the Atlantic. C.P. Brady, a surfman on lookout duty at the Cape Hatteras Coast Guard Station, looks out over the churning breakers.
And there she is, the Carroll A. Deering, hard aground.
But remember, her sails weren't furled. Every single canvas is set, catching the brutal winter gale, acting as massive levers pushing the hull deeper into the shifting sands.
But seeing the wreck and boarding the wreck are two completely different realities. We are in the dead of winter. The environmental hostility of Diamond Shoals is at its absolute peak.
The surf is violently churning, the waves are mountainous, and the wind is screaming.
For 4 agonizing days, the weather is so atrocious that the Coast Guard surfboats simply cannot launch without being immediately capsized and smashed to pieces.
Think about the psychological torture inflicted on the Coast Guard crews on the beach. I mean, you are Surfman Brady. You are staring at this colossal shipwreck through your binoculars. You know the water temperature is lethal.
And you are agonizing over the possibility that there are terrified, freezing, injured sailors trapped inside that wooden hull.
Praying for a rescue that you cannot physically provide. For 4 days, you just stand on the freezing beach, listening to the wind, wondering who is slowly dying out there.
It is a profound test of endurance. But finally, on February 4th, the gale breaks just enough to offer a window.
The rescue crews launch their specialized surf boats, battle through the remaining breakers, pull themselves alongside the violently pitching hull, and finally board the Carroll A. Deering.
And the scene they encounter when they swing their legs over the rail is the stuff of legend.
What do they see?
Well, the first thing that hits them is the absolute suffocating silence. Yes, the wind is howling and the surf is pounding the timbers, but human-wise, the ship is dead quiet.
It has been completely abandoned.
Completely. And as they begin to process the forensic evidence left behind, the mystery deepens into a terrifying paradox.
What's the first thing they notice?
The Coast Guard investigators establish what is absent. The ship's official logbook is completely gone. All the primary navigation equipment, the sextants, the charts, the site reduction tables, gone.
Every single trace of the crew's personal effects, their sea bags, their clothing, all of it is completely missing.
And most tellingly, both of the ship's massive, heavy lifeboats are gone from their davits.
Okay, so if you just look at that evidence in a vacuum, it paints a very clear picture. Missing lifeboats, missing winter clothing, missing logs. That is the hallmark of an orderly, highly planned evacuation.
Right, the crew realized the ship was doomed. They packed their survival gear, systematically lowered the boats, and rowed away.
But then the Coast Guard explores further aft toward the helm, and the orderly evacuation theory is violently shattered.
When they reach the steering gear, they find evidence of extreme, intentional, heavy-handed sabotage.
Yeah, the massive wooden steering wheel has been utterly shattered.
The binnacle box has been violently stove in, and deep beneath the deck, the ship's massive iron rudder has been deliberately disengaged from its stock.
Let's focus on the mechanics of that sabotage, because this isn't just like kicking a piece of wood.
Not at all. To understand the malice here, you have to look at the engineering of a 1919 vessel. A binnacle on a ship of this class isn't a flimsy compass on a dashboard. It's a heavy, reinforced brass and wood stanchion secured directly to the deck. It houses the magnetic compass suspended in gimbals, surrounded by heavy, compensating iron spheres.
So stowing that in requires heavy, repeated, intentional blows with a sledgehammer or an axe.
You are intentionally blinding the vessel.
And the rudder stock.
The rudder stock is the massive vertical steel or iron shaft connecting the wheel mechanism down through the hull to the rudder blade itself.
So disengaging that means going down into the lazarette, that cramped, dark space right above the stern post, and physically dismantling heavy mechanical linkages.
This is heavy engineering work. It takes heavy tools, time, and a deliberate, focused intent to render the ship utterly unsteerable.
You don't do that if you're just fleeing a storm. You do that to guarantee the ship cannot be controlled by anyone left behind.
Exactly. If you've locked a wounded Captain Ormel in his cabin and you want to ensure he can't break out and steer the ship to port to report your mutiny, you destroy the helm.
You turn the massive vessel into a helpless, blind piece of driftwood.
But the sheer violence of the helm sabotage directly contradicts the orderly packing of the sea bags.
It makes no sense.
And the Coast Guard discovers one final haunting detail that throws the entire timeline into chaos. They make their way down into the ship's galley, and sitting directly on the stove, they find food.
It is actively being prepared for the next day's meal.
They find pea soup, ribs, and coffee.
The psychological dissonance of that meal is staggering.
It really is.
I mean, you have a crew that has packed all their belongings and executed a highly coordinated evacuation. You have a helm that has been subjected to furious, heavy tool sabotage.
And you have a cook who is casually prepping ribs for tomorrow's lunch.
What terrifying sequence of events causes a crew to calmly pack their bags and launch lifeboats into a deadly, freezing ocean while dinner is on the stove?
If we logically sequence those contradictory clues, we are forced to imagine a timeline of sudden, calculated betrayal right in the middle of domestic routine.
The food suggests the crisis initiated abruptly, likely during the evening watch.
The violence at the helm was the initial, decisive strike. The mutineers swarming the quarterdeck, neutralizing the officers, and immediately smashing the steering column and compass to seize absolute control and blind the ship.
Once the initial bloodletting was over, the adrenaline faded into grim calculation.
The mutineers knew they couldn't stay aboard a dead ship that was now a floating crime scene, so they took their time.
They systematically packed their warm clothes, gathered the logs to hide any evidence of their navigational route, swung out the heavy lifeboats, and abandoned the vessel,
Leaving the soup on the stove.
It is a portrait of a ship that was murdered mid-breath. And the physical evidence was such a profound, terrifying paradox that local authorities realized they were completely out of their depth.
The implications of this mutiny, or whatever it was, were too vast.
So the federal government had to step in, leading to one of the most bizarre investigations in maritime history.
The scale of the governmental response was absolutely unprecedented for a single merchant shipwreck. We are not just talking about a regional Coast Guard tribunal here.
No, 5 major departments of the United States government launched active investigations. The Department of Commerce, the Treasury, the Department of Justice, the Navy, and the State Department. Why such a massive, synchronized federal response? What was the underlying fear?
Well, the context of the era is paramount here. The Secretary of Commerce at the time was Herbert Hoover, the man who would shortly become president.
Right.
Hoover was analyzing maritime data, and he was deeply unsettled by a pattern he was seeing in the Atlantic. The Deering was not an isolated incident.
Hoover noted that several other major vessels of various nationalities had recently vanished in roughly the same geographic area without a single distress call.
The most terrifying parallel was a massive 5,000-ton sulfur freighter called the Hewitt, which had simply ceased to exist, taking its entire crew with it.
So there was a growing, palpable fear within the government that something or someone was systematically hunting American and international shipping.
Hoover put his top assistant, Lawrence Ritchie, in charge of mapping out the disappearances.
So you have the federal government on high alert, the public is terrified of a phantom menace haunting the Atlantic, and the families of the Deering crew are desperate, grieving, and completely in the dark.
And into this highly charged, emotional powder keg drops one of the most devastatingly cruel hoaxes I have ever encountered in history.
Oh, this part makes me so angry. On April 11, 1921, a couple of months after the wreck was thoroughly documented, a local fisherman walking the beach in Buxton, North Carolina, claims to spot a glass bottle floating in the surf.
He pulls it out, discovers a handwritten note inside, and immediately turns it over to the local authorities.
I'm going to read the exact text of this note, because you have to hear the sheer terror it was designed to evoke. Imagine you are Captain Wormel's widow, sitting in your parlor, and a federal agent hands you a transcript of this hastily scribbled message.
It's agonizing.
It says, Deering captured by oil-burning boat, something like chaser, taking off everything, handcuffing crew. Crew hiding all over ship, no chance to make escape. Finder please notify headquarters Deering.
It is a meticulously crafted nightmare. It suggests high seas piracy, a violent abduction, and a crew desperately hiding in the pitch-black hold of the ship, listening to footsteps above them as they are hunted down and placed in irons.
And the most agonizing part of this hoax is that initially, the supporting evidence was incredibly compelling.
The investigators didn't just dismiss it. They took the physical note to Wormel's widow.
She studies the handwriting, the slant of the letters, the phrasing, and she firmly identifies it. She tells the federal agents, that is the handwriting of the ship's engineer, Herbert Bates.
And remember the psychological context. Bates was the one single man on the entire ship that Captain Wormel said he actually trusted.
Furthermore, the forensics team examines the glass bottle itself, and they definitively trace its origin to a manufacturer in Brazil.
Which perfectly aligns with the Deering's route, having just delivered coal to Rio.
And if you add that physical evidence to the eyewitness sighting by Captain Jacobson at the Cape Lookout lightship, the piracy theory suddenly gains massive traction.
Remember, shortly after Jacobson saw the Deering sail past with the mysterious red-haired man on the megaphone, he reported seeing a second, unidentified steamer arrive in the Deering's wake.
Jacobson tried to hail this mysterious steamer, but the crew completely ignored him. And chillingly, Jacobson noted that the crew of that steamer had draped a large canvas tarp over their bow to deliberately conceal their ship's nameplate.
So you have an unidentified ship hiding its identity, a Brazilian bottle, handwriting recognized by the widow, and a message screaming about handcuffs.
For a brief, agonizing window of time, the families of the crew were given hope. It was a terrifying hope, the idea that their husbands and sons were locked in the brig of a pirate ship somewhere. But it meant they weren't rotting at the bottom of the ocean. They were alive.
But then the cold, hard logic of the federal investigators began to dismantle the illusion.
How did they figure it out?
The linguistic phrasing of the note was the first red flag. Investigators asked themselves, if a terrified engineer is hiding in the dark from armed pirates, and he miraculously finds a pen, paper, and an empty bottle, and manages to throw it out a porthole,
Right.
why on earth would he conclude his final plea for survival with the bureaucratic phrase, please notify headquarters Deering?
Why wouldn't you write, help us, or notify the Navy, or call the Coast Guard?
Exactly. So the agents bypass the widow's emotional identification and take the note to professional government handwriting analysts.
And the experts compare the bottle note against known official samples of Herbert Bates's handwriting from the company logs.
Their conclusion is absolute. The note is a complete forgery.
The federal agents immediately return to Buxton and corner the fisherman who found it. They interrogate him relentlessly.
Yeah.
And finally, the fisherman breaks down and confesses to the entire scheme.
He admitted he found an empty Brazilian bottle that had naturally washed up on the beach.
Yeah.
He forged the dramatic note, stuffed it inside, and pretended to discover it.
And his motive for inflicting this immense psychological torture on grieving families.
He thought the intense national publicity he would generate by finding the crucial piece of evidence would make him famous enough to secure a steady government job working at the Cape Hatteras lighthouse.
It is a profound demonstration of human selfishness. He willingly weaponized the grief of widows and the paranoia of the federal government just to get his foot in the door for a job interview.
It is absolutely sickening. But once the bottle hoax was entirely exposed and discarded, the 5 federal departments had to return to the hard physical facts of the wrecked schooner.
They systematically evaluated 5 major theories of doom to explain the vanishing of the crew. Let's dig into the mechanics of these theories, because they perfectly encapsulate the specific anxieties of the 1920s.
The first major theory was championed by the United States Weather Bureau: hurricanes.
Right.
They pointed to meteorological data showing a series of particularly vicious, powerful gales sweeping through the Atlantic during the exact window of the Deering's transit.
The horror of a hurricane at sea in 1921 is unimaginable. The sheer noise, the vessel pitching at 45-degree angles, the freezing water constantly washing over the deck.
But as an explanation for the Deering's specific condition, the mechanics of a weather evacuation just don't fit the forensic evidence.
They absolutely do not. Maritime researchers pointed out the fatal flaws in the weather theory. First, historical weather tracking proved that both the Deering and the vanished freighter Hewitt were actually sailing away from the direct path of those specific storm systems.
But more importantly, the state of the ship refutes a panic evacuation.
Exactly. If a 100-foot rogue wave has just breached your hull or a hurricane has dismasted you, you do not have the time or the calm demeanor to systematically pack your heavy sea bags, gather your personal effects, and carefully lower 2 massive lifeboats into a churning sea.
And you certainly don't leave the pea soup neatly simmering on the galley stove if the ship is violently tearing itself apart.
So natural weather disaster is ruled out. Theory number 2 brings us deep into the illicit economy of the 1920s: piracy and rum runners.
This is the height of prohibition in the United States. Bootlegging isn't just a side hustle. It is a massive, incredibly violent, highly organized industry.
The prevailing theory was that heavily armed liquor smugglers intercepted the Deering, murdered the crew, and intended to use the massive ship as the floating warehouse to smuggle illegal alcohol past the Coast Guard.
And strictly in terms of volumetric capacity, the theory has legs. The Deering was a cavernous cargo vessel. Marine authors calculated she had enough space in her hold to carry roughly $1 million worth of illicit liquor.
Captain O.W. Parker of the Marine Shipping Board strongly advocated for this scenario, insisting that violent, opportunistic piracy was still very much a reality off the American coast.
Even Captain Wormel's widow clung to this theory, heavily primed by the bottle hoax to believe her husband had been captured by criminals.
But again, let's apply operational logic to the rum runner theory.
The Deering is a 5-masted schooner standing over 250 feet long. She relies entirely on the wind. She is incredibly, unavoidably conspicuous.
You can see her sails from miles away on the horizon. The rum runners of the 1920s utilized low-profile, highly motorized speedboats that could outrun Coast Guard cutters in the dark.
If you are a smuggler trying to stealthily bypass federal patrols, hijacking a massive, slow, wind-dependent dinosaur of a sailing ship is quite literally the worst operational decision you could possibly make.
Furthermore, absolutely no evidence of piracy, no bullet holes, no bloodstains, no smuggled goods was ever found, and no suspects were ever apprehended.
Which perfectly transitions into theory number 3. And this one is fascinating not because of its maritime logic, but because of what it reveals about the societal horror of the era.
Communist piracy.
The Red Scare. This is taking place shortly after the Russian Revolution. The American government is deeply paranoid about Bolshevik infiltration.
During a highly publicized police raid on the headquarters of a known communist organization operating out of New York City, law enforcement officers allegedly uncovered documents that explicitly called on sympathizers to seize American merchant ships and sail them to the Soviet Union.
Hardline anti-communist factions within the government immediately pointed to these documents as the definitive explanation for the Deering.
It is the ultimate psychological projection of national fears onto an unsolved mystery. When you have a massive void of information, society naturally fills that void with whatever its current boogeyman happens to be.
But we must be absolutely clear. There was zero forensic evidence that any of these alleged Soviet seizure plans were ever executed, let alone on the Deering.
Which leaves the investigators and us with the final major theory. The most terrifying, the most intimately violent, and frankly, the most logically sound explanation.
Mutiny.
Senator Frederick Hale of Maine reviewed the entirety of the evidence, the logs, the telegrams, the Coast Guard reports, and stated bluntly to the press that it was a plain case of mutiny.
And if we trace the psychological breadcrumbs we've discussed, the structural logic of a mutiny is overwhelming.
You have the exact ingredients for a localized rebellion.
You have Captain Wormel's documented, openly expressed hatred for his Scandinavian crew in Rio.
You have First Mate McClellan's literal, unambiguous death threat against the captain in Barbados.
You have a crew of foreign sailors who likely deeply resented both their aging, visually impaired captain and their volatile, drunken first mate.
And most damningly, you have Captain Jacobson's verified sighting of an unknown, foreign-accented man commanding the vessel, while the deckhands unlawfully occupied the officer's sacred territory on the quarterdeck.
Let's look at this through the lens of a true crime scene where every forensic clue points to a singular, brutal timeline.
If it was mutiny, the sequence of events is a masterpiece of psychological horror.
The crew, perhaps instigated by McClellan or perhaps acting autonomously against both officers, decides they have had enough. The breaking point arrives, maybe over a discipline issue, maybe over a navigational error.
They surge onto the quarterdeck. The violence is swift and absolute.
Yeah.
They murder Captain Wormel. They murder First Mate McClellan.
They likely throw the bodies overboard into the Atlantic, erasing the primary evidence of their crime.
And then the engineering sabotage begins. They take heavy sledges and axes to the steering wheel and the binnacle box.
They send men down into the lazarette to systematically disengage the heavy iron rudder stock.
They do this to ensure the ship cannot be traced, cannot be steered by anyone who might have survived, and cannot be salvaged to tell the tale.
They pack their warm clothing. They systematically load the 2 lifeboats with provisions.
They decide to take their chances rowing into the freezing open ocean rather than remain aboard a 255-foot floating crime scene.
But the ocean is an indifferent executioner. Whatever their escape plan was, whether they hoped to row to the North Carolina shore and claim the ship had simply foundered in a storm, or whether they were instantly swallowed by a rogue wave the moment they cleared the hull, none of those men were ever seen again.
The federal investigation officially closed in late 1922 without issuing a definitive conclusion. Despite 5 government departments and months of inquiry, they essentially threw their hands up.
The mystery was entirely swallowed by the sea.
Which brings us to the physical erasure of the Carroll A. Deering. You can't just leave a massive 1,800-ton wooden shipwreck sitting on the shifting sandbars of Diamond Shoals.
No, it acts as a lethal hazard to other shipping transiting the graveyard of the Atlantic.
So, on March 4th, 1921, the Coast Guard determined that salvage operations were completely impossible. They boarded her one final time, rigged the magnificent wooden hull with heavy explosive, and dynamited her.
The ship was literally blown to splinters to clear the navigational channel.
But the Deering possessed a deeply haunting afterlife. It is as if the ship utterly refused to die.
34 years later, in September 1955, Hurricane Ione swept through the Outer Banks. The sheer meteorological power of that storm reached down into the ocean floor, ripped the sunken, shattered lower hull of the Deering from the sand, and violently deposited it 9 miles away onto the beach at Hatteras Island.
Even decades after her death, the ship wouldn't rest. Local residents actually salvaged some of those massive oak timbers that washed ashore and used them as structural beams to build houses that are still standing today.
As for the human element, Carroll A. Deering, the owner's son and the namesake of the doomed vessel, lived a long, prosperous life, dying in 1967 at the age of 84.
Today, if you visit the graveyard of the Atlantic Museum down in Hatteras, you can still see the ship's massive brass bell and her iron capstan, the few indestructible pieces that survived the mutiny, the dynamite, and the sea.
When we synthesize all of this, the endurance of the story over a century later speaks to our primal understanding of the ocean.
It really does.
We build these colossal, majestic machines. We establish rigid chains of command, maritime laws, and daily routines. We try to impose terrestrial order onto the water.
But the ocean simply does not care. It is an environment that is totally immune to our interpersonal conflicts, our drunken death threats in tropical bars, our mutinies, or our desperate attempts at survival. It simply takes. It violently strips away every illusion of control. Once you leave the shore, you are entirely dependent on the frailties of human psychology and the unpredictable wrath of nature.
Yeah.
And that reality leads me to a final provocative thought that I want you, the listener, to mull over as we conclude this deep dive. We have spent this entire hour analyzing what happened on the ship.
We've dissected the mechanics of the smashed compass, the shattered wheel, the captain's failing eyesight, the death threats, the soup left simmering on the stove.
But for a moment, shift your perspective. Put yourself in the shoes of the crew.
The men who executed the violence and then made the ultimate decision to leave the safety of the hull.
Exactly. Consider their psychological reality in those final moments. After whatever horrific, blood-soaked violence occurred on that quarterdeck, the adrenaline inevitably starts to fade.
The cold reality of what they've just done sets in. They are murderers.
They gather their bags in the freezing wind, they swing up the heavy davits and lower their small, fragile, open wooden lifeboats into the pitch-black, churning, freezing expanse of the Atlantic Ocean.
They grab the heavy wooden oars, and as they pull away into the darkness, riding those massive swells, they look back.
What was it like in those final hours, bobbing helplessly in the freezing dark, watching the magnificent, massive, warm ship they just brutally sabotaged sail away from them into the fog like a ghost? Imagine the slow, creeping realization that by trying to violently escape the tyranny of their captain, they had actually just sealed their own icy doom.